I've always been the type to notice everything around me, especially living alone. My building is one of those old ones, where you end up knowing the neighbor's routine, even unintentionally. But there was one thing that started to bother me in a different way. I realized that, every night, without fail, at 3:17 in the morning, the light in the room of the apartment next to mine turned on. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, or maybe someone who always woke up at this time. But there was a day that I noticed better. The apartment was empty. Really empty. The neighbor had moved more than a month ago, and no one new had entered there. The first time this really caught my attention was when I got late from work. I was passing through the corridor and saw, through the slit under the door, the strong light on inside. I thought it was strange, but I went my way. After that, I started to notice better. It wasn't just that the light turned on. It was always the same room, at the same intensity, and at the same minute, 3:17. Every night. And the most bizarre, it was on for exactly 7 minutes and then erased, as if it had been programmed. I even tried to ignore it, telling myself that it must be some electrical problem, but a part of me knew that there was something very wrong happening there. After a couple of weeks of seeing that happen, I started to get paranoid. Every day, without fail, I woke up just to see if the light would turn on again. And it always turned on. I even recorded it on my phone a few times, just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining anything. One night, I took courage and got very close to the door of the empty apartment, trying to hear some sound. No noise, no sign of movement. Just that heavy silence at dawn, and the light on illuminating the door slit. I thought about calling the syndic, but I thought they would think I was crazy or say it was just a defect. Deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. One day, I decided to do something that I still regret. I waited for the light to turn on and went to my balcony, which is glued to that of the apartment next door. I climbed on the railing and tried to look out the window, which had an open slit. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, nothing. But even so, the ceiling light was on, as if someone was inside. The worst thing was that, while I was trying to see better, I had the clear impression of seeing a shadow pass very quickly on the wall. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I decided to ask the janitor about the apartment. He said that the owner had moved months ago, and that the property had been empty since then, just waiting to be sold. When I commented on the light, he was a little uncomfortable and said that sometimes the maintenance staff went there to check some things, but never at night, much less at 3 in the morning. That's when I started to get really worried. I came home feeling weird, with that feeling that there was something wrong not only with the apartment but with that whole building. That morning, I decided to record with an improvised camera pointed directly at the neighbor's door. I lay down on the bed, but I couldn't even relax properly. When it was 3:17 a.m., the light turned on again, as always. I got up to check the recording, and on the screen, I saw something that froze my blood. For a few seconds, I could see a shadow standing inside the door, as if he was watching me through the rift. It was something dark without a defined shape, but you could feel that it was not normal. I turned everything off and spent the rest of the night awake, sitting on the sofa in the living room, with all the lights on. The next day, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. I was looking at the door of the empty apartment all the time, expecting to see some movement. Even with the strong morning sun, the feeling of discomfort did not pass. I thought about calling the building administration again, but deep down I knew they wouldn't believe it or would simply ignore me. So I decided to do something else. I put a small piece of tape on the bottom of the neighbor's door, something discreet, just to see if someone really went out or came in without me noticing. That night arrived faster than I would like. I forced myself to stay awake, even dead tired. When the clock struck 3:17 a.m., I saw the light turn on again, but this time there was more. I heard footsteps. Clear, heavy, coming from inside the apartment. And they were not a few. It looked like someone was walking from one side to the other, dragging their feet across the floor. The tape I put on the door was still intact. In other words, no one had entered. I was paralyzed. I could only hear that muffled sound of slow steps and the faint buzz of the corridor lights. The next day, I was already at the limit. I almost couldn't sleep after that. When I got up, the first thing I did was run to the hallway to check the neighbor's door. The tape was still there, the way I put it on. That's when I started to consider things that I had never taken seriously before. Like, I don't know, something beyond our understanding. I spent the whole day anxiously, looking at the door, the clock, waiting for the dawn to come again. It seemed crazy, but part of me wanted to confirm if that would happen again. And, as if it were scheduled, at 3:17 a.m. the following morning, the light turned on again. Only this time it wasn't just the steps. I swear I heard someone hitting the wall lightly, as if it were with their nails. Rhythmic beats, soft, but that echoed strongly in the silence of the dawn. I got goosebumps. I took my phone, recorded a piece of what I could capture from the sound, but the audio was so weak that it looked like I was making it up. Even so, I sent it to a friend of mine, who answered only with a "Man, get out of there." The next morning, I called the real estate agency who took care of the apartments, made up some excuse, and asked if 305, the neighbor, was rented to someone. The woman on the phone hesitated before answering, and that has already put me on alert. After a few seconds, she said that the property had been empty for months, that they hadn't even given the key to anyone yet. When I hung up, I was sitting on the couch with the phone in my hand, not knowing what to do. I wasn't going crazy. If no one lived there, who or what was turning on that light? That night was the worst of all. I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on the living room floor, with the door leaning, looking through the sling. When it was 3:17 a.m., the light turned on as usual. But this time, I heard the doorknob of my door turn very slowly. At the time, I froze. I held my breath. I couldn't even move. It looked like there was someone on the other side trying to open, but without forcing, as if he just wanted to see if it was unlocked. I waited a few endless minutes until the noise stood. When I finally got the courage to look through the peephole, the corridor was empty, but the light in the next room was still on. The next day, I was determined to do something. I spent the whole day nervous, looking out the window all the time. When it was late in the afternoon, I decided to put adhesive tape on my door, in a way that, if someone tried to open it again, the tape would tear and I would know. I also left my phone charged and with the camera ready to record anything strange. The anxiety was consuming me, but at the same time I needed a proof to show that I wasn't making it all up. When it was 3:17 a.m., the light turned on again. My heart already shot at the time. I stared through the door slit, almost without blinking. This time, I didn't hear the handle turning, but a soft noise, as if someone was leaning their face against my door, breathing. It was a very subtle sound, but you could hear it. I took my cell phone and started recording, shaking. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. I waited a little longer before looking through the magic eye, and that's when I saw. The door of 305 was ajar, with the light still on, but there was no one in sight. The next day, I didn't even need to check the tape on my door. When I woke up and went to see, she was torn. At the time I froze. I mean, someone tried to open my door while I was in there. I spent the rest of the day without the courage to leave the house, just looking out the window and checking the cell phone camera. The problem is that the video I recorded at dawn didn't capture almost anything, just a strange hiss in the audio and a shadow passing quickly at the door. I couldn't see a face, nothing identifiable. It seemed like the whole thing wanted to drive me crazy on purpose. So I decided to talk to the doorman of the building, to ask about the resident of 305. He looked at me a little uncomfortable and said that that apartment had been empty for months. The last tenant had moved at dawn, out of nowhere, claiming that there were strange things going on. The doorman spoke softly, as if he was afraid to touch on the subject. That's when I started to think that maybe that wasn't just someone trying to scare me. Maybe there was something worse, something that not even the doorman wanted to comment on. After that conversation, I started to feel even more paranoid. Every snap in the building, every sound coming from the corridor sounded louder than it should be. At night, I locked all the doors and even piled a chair against the entrance, something I had never done before. When it was 3:17 a.m., I was already awake, sitting on the couch, staring at the balcony door. And again, the light in room 305 turned on. But this time, something caught my attention even more. It seemed like there was someone at the window, standing looking directly at me. I couldn't see details, but I felt like I was being stared at. My instinct was to pull the curtains at the time. My heart was racing. It felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. I took my cell phone and filmed it hidden, but the video only caught a dim light and a still figure. Nothing clear enough to show it to someone and not look crazy. I spent the whole night without being able to sleep. The light in the room was on for about 20 minutes and then turned off as always. When it finally dawned, I was decided. I would leave there as soon as possible. Before going, I decided to take one last look at the corridor, just to make sure everything was in order. When I opened the door to my apartment, I realized that the 305 was leaning, not locked as it always was. A chill ran down my back. I knew it wasn't a good idea, but curiosity spoke louder. I took a few steps towards the door, and, without touching anything, I looked inside. The apartment seemed completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, no signs that someone lived there. It was as if that place had been abandoned a long time ago. I ran back to my apartment and started packing my things like crazy. While packing, I heard the door of 305 slam hard, as if someone had closed everything. When I looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. I felt a pressure in my chest, an almost uncontrollable desire to get out of there on time. I didn't even wait to finish tidying everything up. I took my bags the way they were and called an app car. While waiting in the lobby of the building, I could still see the light of room 305 turning on upstairs at 3:17 in the morning, as if he was saying goodbye to me. The next morning, already safe in my new place, I still couldn't quite understand what happened. A few days later, I decided to try to research about the building, but I didn't find anything. No strange story, no account of something that explained what happened to me. The only thing I found was a comment from an old resident of the building, who mentioned the light of 305. He said it always turned on exactly at 3:17 in the morning, but no one knew who lived there. He himself had never known who occupied the apartment, but he swore that the light turned on when the building was empty. The strangest? The resident disappeared a few years ago, and no one ever heard from him again. Now every time I see an empty apartment in old buildings, I get that chill. I don't even dare to approach a building so soon. The worst thing is that to this day, if I close my eyes, I can feel that feeling of being watched, as if something was waiting for me on the corner, there next door. If I were braver, I would have tried to go back to the building and investigate more. But honestly, I didn't want anything else to do with that place. I just hope I never have to deal with what I saw that night again. And the light of 305, well, it still appears every night at 3:17 a.m., according to the most recent residents. I always thought I lived in a quiet place, a simple apartment on the third floor of an old building on a quiet street. I usually spend my days working and taking care of my routine, until one day when I got home, I noticed something different. There was a note stuck to the door of my apartment. At first, I thought it was some advertising or something like that. When I opened it, the feeling of discomfort was instantaneous. The note only said, "I know what you did last Tuesday." I was paralyzed. How did anyone know that? I hadn't told anyone. It wasn't something relevant or that needed attention. But that note was something I couldn't explain. Things got worse when, the next day, the ticket was there again. And it wasn't just a vague message like the first time. It was something more intimate, more specific. "I saw you through the window when you were leaving for work yesterday at 7:45 a.m. I knew no one could have seen me there. I live on a high floor, and there is no possibility of someone simply watching me like that, without being outside." It started to bother me in a way I couldn't control. I spent the day trying to find some logical explanation. But as the messages became more personal, my discomfort grew. "I know what you like to do on weekends, alone in the park." How is this possible? I didn't tell anyone these details. The next morning, a new note was attached to my door. That was the scariest part. He mentioned something that only I knew. Something that happened weeks ago, something I never shared with anyone. The message said, "I saw you that day at the cafe. You were with him, and he looked at you the same way I did." I understand. I froze when I read that. The coffee. I knew exactly what day he was talking about. It had been a casual meeting, where I went to the cafe near my house with a friend. It wasn't something I had told anyone. And yet, this person knew. When I started looking around more carefully, I realized that there were cameras in the nearby buildings, but no matter how hard I tried, I could never see anything suspicious in them. Nothing that could give me answers. I was being watched, but in a way that left me groundless. I decided I was going to leave that place. Something inside me knew that, with each note, I was closer to something I couldn't control. I didn't know who was behind this, but I felt that he was approaching. I was already tired of trying to understand the reason, the why. I needed to leave before it was too late. When I took my things to go, I noticed something. There was no ticket at the door, but a key. An old key, as if it had been used many years ago. I trembled while looking at her. Where was she? Who left her there? The thought that someone was still inside my apartment, perhaps watching me, terrified me even more. I only knew that, at that moment, my life would never be the same. I tried to leave, but something made me stop. The key. She was in my pocket, but I didn't remember to pick her up. I went to the door of my apartment and looked through the keyhole. The darkness of the corridor gave me the feeling that someone was there, waiting for me. I hesitated, but then by instinct, I turned the key in the lock. She fit perfectly. The door opened slowly. I was shaking, but something inside me knew I needed to take the next step, or I would be even more paralyzed. I entered. The apartment was normal, but the silence was deafening. So, I saw something on the kitchen table. A ticket. It was folded and glued next to a cup that I didn't remember leaving there. I warned you, now you know what to do. The message seemed so simple, but at the same time, so personal. As if someone had controlled my life for a time that I couldn't measure. I looked at the window and saw something reflected in the glass. I couldn't distinguish, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I no longer knew if I was alone, or if the person who was watching me was now inside my own apartment, somewhere hidden, waiting for me to discover something I shouldn't. What would you do if you started receiving secret tickets, with information that only someone very close could know? Have you ever been through something similar? I live in an old building, with thin walls and some neighbors who rarely show up. At first, the sounds of the building never bothered me. However, a few weeks ago, I started hearing something strange every night around midnight. It was a cry, low and muffled, but enough to make me uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just the noise of some younger neighbor or a sound coming from outside. But the crying seemed to come from inside, from the wall next to my room. Every night, he got louder and more distressing. I tried to ignore it, but the sound seemed to drag on, as if someone was crying nonstop. I went to the door of the neighboring apartment to see if everything was okay, but I couldn't make contact. The door was always locked, and the residents, an older couple who rarely moved, did not answer. The whole thing seemed bizarre, but since the walls of the building are thin, I thought it was just some neighbor having a difficult night. But the crying didn't stop. I called the building management, and they said that the apartment next door was empty, that the owners had moved months ago. The explanation they gave me was that it was a simple echo coming from the old premises. But I knew it wasn't that. Every night, the sound intensified, and I couldn't sleep properly anymore. I started to wonder if I was going crazy. That couldn't be real. I decided to investigate. The next night, I went to the corridor, trying to identify where the sound came from, which now seemed clearer. When I arrived at the door of the empty apartment, something made me hesitate. I saw that the door was slightly ajar. It was strange. I swear the door never looked like this. Anxiety took over me, but I pushed the door carefully. The house was totally empty, but the crying came from somewhere inside the apartment. I started looking at every corner, trying to understand what was happening, when something made me stop. At the back of the room, the wall looked younger, and there was something strange in the painting. I approached, feeling a chill go up my spine. The crying was now so loud that it seemed to be coming from inside me. When I touched the wall, I could almost feel the vibration of the sound, as if something or someone was back there. Fear dominated me. I left the apartment as soon as possible and called the police, reporting everything. But when the cops arrived, they didn't find anything abnormal. They said the story was unlikely, and that maybe I was hearing things because of the stress. I couldn't explain what happened. None of the neighbors around seemed to hear what I was hearing, and when questioned, everyone said they didn't know anything. The crying didn't stop, and now, every night, it seems closer, more real. The wall next to my room is the same, and the sound comes from there. Have you ever heard something like that? Have you ever had the feeling that something is happening around you, but no one else seems to notice?